computers, I have to say that. Some of us, despite our best efforts, are still sort of techno-twits, and I have to put myself in that category, and they've been very generous with time and not at all patronizing if you ever want to use them. This is the third in our series of talks on food matters. The presenters are viewing the issues from slightly different lenses. That was by design, because the purpose of the talks is not just to provide information, but to get people thinking about the issues and hopefully taking some actions on them as well. The speakers don't always see the solutions to the problems presented by our food system in the same way. If you were here for Phil Gregory's talk, or if you would like to listen to it through the link on the library, you'll be able to see that Charles and Phil have some differences on the particulars of the solutions. But where there is agreement amongst all the speakers is that food is a critical issue, both for us as individuals and our own individual health, for our communities, and also for our planet and global warming, that's a throwback, the climate emergency. I think one of the things that I find the most hopeful about what each of the speakers has to say is a conviction that what we do matters, and that's part of the title of the talks, is that food matters, that our actions and the actions that we support, whether it's in our communities or our households or the initiatives of our government, that those things really do matter, and that they can have a huge impact on where we are in our climate emergency today. I know that Charles has been working very hard to prepare his talk and to bring us the latest from the international discussions on issues surrounding food and biodiversity. Charles has a PhD in genetics with a focus on conservation biology, so his interest goes way back. And he spent 34 years with the United Nations in various roles related to biodiversity and ecosystems, climate change, sustainable energy, and land and water management. This past year, he's retired from his role as a senior advisor on forests and the environment, but he continues to play a significant role on the international scene. He is still overseeing the Rainforest Initiative, and he's contributing as a senior fellow of the Meridian Institute. We had to change the date for Charles's talk because next week, when he was supposed to be giving his talk, he's actually going to be in Ecuador. He's been invited as an advisor to an event organized by Indigenous people on sustainable economic development within a framework of zero deforestation. Charles sent me a description of the event that was sent to him by the organizers, and they are promising an immersive experience. Quote, "This is not an event in a New York skyscraper, a London office, or a built-up UN conference center. No panels, no PowerPoints." But today, Charles has in fact prepared a PowerPoint for us to complement his talk today, and I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Charles McNeill.
Great, well thank you all for being here. I really worked hard on this talk, and my challenge is to get it to fit within the time we have. I'm honored to follow Dr. Phil Gregory's tour de force presentation in November on nature and technology and the importance of protecting our soils, and Dr. Hassan Hutchison's talk on behind the scenes with the Canada Food Guide. And the more I study this topic, the more advanced and outstanding I understand that Canada's guide is, and that's thanks to Hassan. It's really an amazing piece of work. And thanks to Elaine and Marisha and Tina and Leo and the Bowen Island Food Resilience Society and the Bowen Library for the opportunity to be with you. In spite of my ambitious title, I want to confess that I will not be proposing a full-scale solution to all aspects of the food system. I can focus on a few areas. And over the past few years, there's been a real explosion of interest and study and analysis of the impact of our food system on the environment. And I'm going to share some of the insights, some of them as recently as last month and in September in New York. So there's a lot of very exciting works happening, and it's been taking me the last couple of months to try to synthesize some of this. So that's me in the left with my twin brother when I first discovered my interest and love for nature. So my biology experience started here. The topics I'm going to step through are big ones, and here they are. Impacts of our food system on the climate, biodiversity, land, comparison of environmental impact on foods, how to transform the food system by improving production, reducing waste, shifting diets, what sectors to invest in to maximize greenhouse gas emission reductions, and the urgent need to repurpose these terrible things called environmentally harmful subsidies, which I'm going to introduce you to. I also want to talk about what governments are doing that really makes a difference, and then really touch on the topic of alternative proteins. So that's a lot. Any one of these would have deserved an hour, but in my over-ambitious nature, I'm trying to squeeze it all into one short talk. The food system is obviously enormously complex. There are many perspectives and points of view. And I've tried to use credible sources of information, the United Nations, World Bank, credible think tanks and NGOs like the World Resource Institute, WWF, and so on. And I'll present a lot of information, and I invite you to put your seatbelts on and get ready for a wild ride. And please feel free to shout out if I'm going too fast or if something's not clear. And I apologize in advance, there may be more information than we can really go over, and probably too many slides. In my enthusiasm, I've once again bitten off more than I can chew. But feel good about it. You won't be seeing the 65 slides that I prepared and didn't show. 65 that I excluded. So, and I'll make the slides available to you all through the library, through the Resilience Society. And my slides are not very attractive, and they're not very well. And there's a seat up in front here for the. Oh my goodness. Okay. And apologies for the slides that are not attractive or well formatted. I did them all myself. And there are many experts on the food issue here, so I hope I can rely on you to help me with the presentation and the discussion. And just to say, there are many drivers of the climate crisis, and we're going to talk about one of them. It doesn't mean that others aren't important; they obviously are. So yesterday, day before yesterday, we got the bad news that the Earth finished 2024 as the hottest year on record, and it surpassed the global goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius that the world community have been focusing on, not surpassing ever since the Paris Agreement and before. I had hoped over my 30-year career with the UN that I would never see this day. And the previous hottest year was 2023. And this is because we continue to burn huge amounts of coal, oil, gas, and we destroy our forests for agriculture. So a really significant, I really didn't think I'd be giving this talk and having this news. I never thought that was going to happen, but it happened. Now, temperatures go up and down, so it could go down for a few years and it could go up. So it doesn't mean that we cross that threshold forever, but it's a big event. Scientists have known for years that limiting warming to 1.5 degrees was necessary to spare the lives of tens of millions of people from being exposed to the kind of chaos and suffering, the heat waves. Monique, there's a place for you right here in front. The kind of suffering that we're seeing in Los Angeles right now. And each tiny increment of additional warming increases the risks that might mean the difference between a world that has coral reefs and a world that has rainforests and not. There's simple places here. And that's why we're meeting today, to explore a few things that we can do in our own lives. So our food system is undermining our ability to feed humanity now and into the future. And now that's a little bit more bad news. But let's more closely at the environmental impacts of our food system. Food production has changed the face of our planet. It's a major driver of greenhouse gas emissions, generating from 25 to 30% of all global emissions. That's equivalent to the combined emissions of the entire transportation and industrial sectors, so it's significant. Globally, agriculture uses up 70% of all fresh water, depleting groundwater levels and the world's lakes and rivers. I wonder, can people see this slide? Do I need to move one way or another? There are going to be a couple of slides that are really, really small that I hope you can read them. I saw in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia last month during the desertification convention how the acute water crisis billions of people are now suffering under. More than 3/4 of the Earth's land has become permanently drier in recent decades. 3/4 of the Earth's land has become permanently drier in recent decades caused by greenhouse gas emissions. I was really surprised to learn that last month. Also, habitat loss due to the conversion of natural land for food production is the single greatest driver of biodiversity loss. And that's leading us into what's now known as the 6th mass extinction. The last one, the 5th, was caused by a huge meteor that crashed into the Yucatan. This time we're doing it. 80% of the mammal and bird species that are threatened with extinction have agriculture as the cause. And an astounding 80 to 90% of the deforestation of the Amazon is caused by cattle ranching. And the Amazon is now teetering on the brink of a tipping point that could transform this lush rainforest into a grassy savanna, and that would alter weather patterns throughout the world and food production as well. But you and I are going, as Elaine said, are going to the Amazon next week to assess the situation with indigenous peoples there. And with regard to land use, 82% of all agricultural lands are used for grazing and producing feed for livestock. And I want to look at that figure in more detail in the next slide. I find the information on the slide to be astonishing. Of all the habitable land on Earth, you take away the icebergs and the mountains and rocky areas, but 40% of all that land is used to feed humans. So here, 40% of all the habitable land on Earth is for food production. And of that 40%, 82% of all the food land is used for livestock grazing and feed for livestock production. That's red meat, dairy, and poultry. Leaving just 16% for the grains, vegetables, and fruits to directly feed people. 82%, 60%. And that 82% of all agricultural lands for animals produces only 18% of the total calories here, and only 37% of all the protein. So it's using up a tremendous amount of land, producing a relatively small amount of calories and protein. So it's an inefficient use of resources. And I'll argue today that to address our multiple environmental issues, we're going to have to stop expanding this new agricultural land at the expense of natural habitat in order to feed ourselves, and hopefully we can reduce it. Now, let's look at global health trends for a moment. Our dietary choices are characterized by either excess or insufficiency. 1 in 3 people are overweight or obese. That's about 2.5 billion adults. And 1 in 12 are hungry or undernourished, with 735 million people going to bed hungry every night. And diets are a leading cause of death. The Lancet Commission, an organization that Ubuntu works with as a special advisor, concluded that premature mortality could be reduced by 21% and 11 million people's lives saved each year by a shift in diet. And the takeaway I want to just be really clear about is that when we talk about the need for dietary shifts to provide a growing global population with enough healthy food while respecting environmental limits, one size does not fit all. That is to mean it will require require different dietary shifts depending on the current levels of nutrition and consumption. To highlight where we're going with this discussion, for developed countries, dietary shifts need to include a greater proportion of plant-based foods and fewer animal products. However, the countries facing burdens of undernutrition, hunger, and food insecurity, for them, achieving nutrition diets may require increasing consumption, including animal source food. So I just want to be clear about that. We're not saying everybody should have the same patterns and behaviors. Now, since we now see that the food system is the #1 driver of degradation of our climate, our biodiversity, and our land, and it's out of control, you might logically expect that the international governance bodies responsible for those areas, known as the Rio Conventions, would have been focusing on food since their origin in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit. Well, if you thought that, you'd be wrong. In fact, my career with the UN started with the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, and I can confirm that the attention on the food system per se has not been a focus until the past few years. And it's important for an issue like food to get on the international environmental agenda in order to attract the resources, the expertise, the attention, and the momentum to get things done. So that's a really surprising result. But just a brief cap on what are these Rio conventions. The Earth Summit happened in Rio in 1992. 3 conventions were agreed upon at the time: the Convention on Biodiversity, the Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Combating Zoonotic. And I'll bet most of you have never heard of that third one, right? How many people have heard of the Desertification Convention? Okay, it's getting more attention finally, 30 years later. Supporting the Rio Convention conference was my first assignment as a new staff member back in 1992 in the UN. And my entire career has been focused on implementing those conventions, particularly the first 2, by creating and managing funds to finance environmental projects throughout the developing world. And believe it or not, this food system has not shown up until just now. And fortunately, it's now on the agenda, and that's why I'm excited to talk to you today. Significantly, the last quarter of 2024 saw a series of these Rio conventions happening. There was in October the Biodiversity Convention, in November the Climate, and in December the Desertification one. And all of them are focusing on the food system now. You may wonder, how is it possible that this issue would not be on the agenda? And that would probably be the topic of another talk. And I think it has to do with politics and special interests, frankly. So, interestingly, another topic that never got on the agenda until recently is forests and indigenous people's rights, and that's something I've been working on for a long time. So, based on what we have learned in the recent years, let's talk about the actual changes needed to transform the food system. And these are the 3 topics we want to go into today, particularly the middle one. So we need sustainable and efficient food production by improving livestock, as Dr. Phil told us in November, and crop system production. We need to optimize crop yields. We need to improve wild fisheries harvest, aquaculture production. We need to provide enough food for everyone while respecting planetary boundaries. With plant-rich diets, we need to ensure everyone in the world has a nutritious and healthy diet. May involve changing food choices, and we need to reduce food waste. Believe it or not, 30 to 40% of all the food produced in the world is never eaten, and that's wasting just a huge amount of agricultural land, water, energy, and so on. And then, of course, we need to increase financial support for these interventions, and we're going to return to these 3 topics and the finance one again and again over the next coming minutes. So let's back up and get a big picture of the various sectors of our economy that are generating the greenhouse gases that are driving climate change that we're seeing around us. So I just wanted to put the food system within the context of all the drivers of climate. And when it comes to climate, I think you and I hear about clean energy and electric vehicles and so on, but you almost never hear about the role of the food system in there. And as you can see from this diagram, you start at the top and go counterclockwise, there's energy, which means oil and gas, coal, electricity, heat. There's industry, cement, chemicals, metals. There's transport, cars, trucks, trains, planes, shipping, and buildings. And those sectors account for the majority of the greenhouse gases, 70 to 75%. Those are the ones that most people are working on. When it comes to climate, those are the ones that get the attention. But the global food system, which encompasses production, processing, distribution, consumption, is also a key contributor. And it's the light blue quarter on the right. So that's the topic we're talking about, that 27 to 30%, different estimates, the range from 25 to 30% or even higher. But, and the reason we're talking about this is that we can't solve the climate crisis without action in this area. And if we unpack that 27 to 30%, you know, we took the quarter of the previous slide and we elongated there. It's there on the bottom left. You can see from top to bottom on the right the types of emissions: supply chain, livestock and fisheries, crop production, land use, and then the sources of emissions: retail, packaging, transport, and so on and so forth. But if you separate out the proportion of all these emissions that are caused by the production of animal food versus plant food, you'll see that nearly 60% of all emissions are for animals, and nearly 30% for plant food. There's another 14% for cotton and rubber and so on. Beef alone counts for a quarter of the emissions produced by raising and growing food. And I want us to understand the enormous proportion of our food system devoted to animal source foods. I'm not really on a vendetta against animals, so I apologize that it's going to sound that way. By the time you're done, you're going to, I don't want your head spinning, think that I hate animals. I love animals, and we need lots of them, and I really want to, and Dr. Phil will give us another perspective on how important they are, and I agree with him on that. And this pattern of how animal agriculture dominates greenhouse gas emissions from food, with nearly 60% of emissions, is very similar to the pattern we saw earlier where animal agriculture dominated the land use, 82%. So comparing the environmental impact of foods. There are several places here, seats, welcome. I love this slide because it packs in so much information comparing the various foods according to their impacts. Right here, in the front. Impacts of the land use is the green bar, water consumption is the blue bar, greenhouse gas emissions is the orange bar. And it shows animal foods on the right side, the beef, dairy, poultry, pork, eggs, fish, and the plant foods on the left side, roots, tubers, pulses, maize, wheat, and rice. And this slide shows comparisons per ton of protein consumed. The same pattern, this slide is about ton of protein consumed. The same pattern applies to ton of calories consumed, but it's a little more extreme, the difference in that case. It shows what you probably already knew. Plants provide calories and protein far more efficiently than animal source foods. And tell me to stop if you were just in the middle of reading something and I go ahead and say, Charles, stop. Now, feeding calories through animals is equivalent to 89 to 97% food waste. So that's a little bit stark and a little bit contestable, but I just wanted to visualize another way how the difference between eating corn, soy, and wheat yourself versus feeding corn, wheat, and soy to the animals and then eating the animals. There's a difference. The difference is the conversion efficiency of chickens, pigs, and cows varies a lot, but are all very low. Cynthia. Tell her there's a space here. Chickens, 9 calories in to 1 calorie out. That's 11% conversion efficiency. You can see the pigs. You feed them 11 calories, you get 1 calorie out. Right there, Cynthia. 1 calorie out, 2.5% efficiency. So when you eat the chicken, you only get 11% of the calories. And of course, as Dr. Phil Gregory will tell us, in the case of grass-fed cattle, this doesn't apply directly because we cannot eat the grass that the cattle eat. But I think the slide is useful in having us understand the better the inefficiencies embedded in the food system. This slide shows that Canadians are still among the highest per capita consumers of beef. Fortunately, you're not going to believe this, I was surprised, per capita beef consumption in Canada has steadily declined over the past few decades by nearly 40% over the past 40 years. Isn't that amazing? And we should be very happy about that. Canada is remarkably lower in the level of meat consumption, 152 pounds per year per person, than the US, 219 pounds per person. I have dual citizenship, so I don't know which side I'm on this, but I like the Canadians better. But we still have a long way to go. And in spite of that, the total demand for beef in the world is projected to increase greatly without significant increases in productivity that Dr. Gregory is working on. The growing demand for beef will drive further expansion of pasture land if we don't do something about it. This figure shows the global potential for reducing emissions by shifting diets. If everyone adhered to one of the various diets shown on the bottom, current diets, diets that follow national dietary guidelines, flexitarian, pescatarian, vegetarian, and vegan, and the colored bands there show the proportion of the diet allocated to various foods, such as fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, roots, oils, eggs, meat, dairy, poultry, fish, and so on. As expected, the less animal foods, source foods, the less greenhouse gas emissions, and a vegan diet in this case, in this study, would reduce emissions by over 34%. Now, let's take a look at how food systems differ from country to country. If everyone in the world adopted the most current consumption patterns of the world's major economies by 2050, it would require between 1 and 7 Earths to support us. And it would shoot us through any hope of a climate control. Notice that if everyone followed a Canadian diet, we would need 4.5 planets to feed us all. For the US diet, we would need 5.5 planets to feed us all. So we're clearly living beyond our means, and we need to change this. So what sector should we prioritize for public and private investment to have the biggest impacts on climate? And I really apologize for the small type here. Can you read that? Anything? This is like an eye test. Can you see any letters over there? Okay. All right. I didn't have time to change that. Returning to the various sectors that we looked at, the pie chart that are causing climate change. Let's ask the question: what would be the priorities? What would be the return on investment if you were to invest in reducing emissions from these different categories? And a very recent report by the Till Collective, it's a group that I met with in September in New York and learned a lot. They work with a group called Systemique, which is a respected research group, but they compared the relative return on investment to the various sectors, comparing energy to transport, to industry, to buildings, to the food system, in terms of millions of tons of greenhouse gas emissions reduced per $1 billion. And with food system, they further assessed the 3 main areas we talked about: plant-rich food system, reducing food waste, and improving production practices. And you'll see here that investments in plant-rich food system had the highest return on investment, 29, after cement, which was astronomically more efficient even than that. But this suggests that investing in plant-rich activities has tremendous potential for dealing with the climate crisis. And this really surprised me. This is a brand new study, and we can look into the details of what their assumptions are, and we could probably quarrel with some aspects of it, but it's really encouraging result. Now, looking at the results another way, the study reveals that investing in achieving a plant-rich food system offers a reduction of 28 million tons of carbon CO2 equivalent per $1 billion invested, more than 5 times the return on investments in renewable energy, and more than 4 times returns compared to electric vehicles. So it's a player. The food system is now a player and worth investing. Now, this is a cappuccino. I quit coffee for many years, and then I started again. My staff didn't like it because whenever I drank coffee, I turned into the Hulk. My shirt would break, I would turn green, and I would start screaming. So watch out.
Is that a plant-based cappuccino?
What did you say?
Is that a plant-based cappuccino?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Can you take some pictures of this great audience from different perspectives? This.
Is it fine that I take pictures of everybody from the front? I've got lots of the back of your heads.
This is a distinguished group. Okay, where was I? The Hulk, right? Darn, I didn't number these slides. So, according to this, anyway, you get the point. More efficient than renewable energy or electric vehicles. And the benefits would go way beyond climate. The benefits would include releasing over 1.6 billion hectares of land. That's land 12% the size of the planet. It would reduce biodiversity loss by 40%, unlock enormous carbon sequestration. It would save over 1,000 kilometer cubed of water. That's equivalent to all the water used by China and the US together. It would reduce water pollution by 40%, and so on. Huge economic, huge health benefits. So we now see that investing in the 3 major levers for food system transformation makes sense from the climate perspective, and they have, and also in terms of finance, and they have significant additional benefits for biodiversity, water, land, and health. What other sources of funding could we make available for action on climate? And this thing really, really surprised me. This next development. Stay tuned. So I want to say that reducing the impact of food system is going to take a lot of money. And just to say that only 4% of all the funds spent now on climate mitigation, only 4% goes to the food system. Even though, as we just learned, the food system causes nearly 1/3 of all the pollution, it's only getting 4% of the funding. So that's got to change. Oops, not there. So the Food Systems Economics Commission estimated that between $200 and $500 billion a year is needed between now and 2050 to do all the things we need to do on the food system. And while these sums are huge, more than enough finance, I'm going to argue, could be made available through reallocating existing resources. And that comes to my next slide, the dirty little secret. And that is, what I mean by that is the massive public funds that drive climate change, biodiversity loss, and land degradation through what are called environmentally harmful subsidies. And this topic has just exploded in the last few months. It's been on the agenda. In fact, I remember in the 90s, I did a study on this, but it didn't go anywhere. Now, the World Bank, the UN, WRI, WWF, every organization on Earth is focusing on this topic because it's like people have woken up to how important this is. So, now in agriculture, direct subsidies of more than $635 billion a year are driving excessive use of inputs like fertilizers, pesticides, water, and so on that degrade the soil, harm water, and harm human health. And almost 90% of these subsidies, these are payments from public money to businesses usually, to basically do bad things. So 90% of these subsidies have been classified as not only price distorting, but harmful to nature and health. And subsidies for products like beef, soybeans, palm oil cause farmers to push into the forest frontier and are responsible for 14% of forest loss every year. Fisheries subsidies are a key driver of overfishing. We haven't talked about the state of the oceans, but tens of billions of dollars are going into overfishing. And redirecting farming and fisheries subsidies from these harmful practices can enable the sustainable production and consumption of healthy foods. And this mismatch of public funds, this mismatch of how public funds are being used to destroy nature rather than protect it is gaining attention around the world. It's really surprising now in each of these meetings that I've talked about, the biodiversity, climate, land, that government people are standing up. Listen, we've got to stop this. And the head of the Biodiversity Convention spoke at the Montreal meeting a couple of years ago, and he made a plea to the governments, the 190 governments, and listen, you guys are spending trillions of dollars destroying nature, and then you're putting a couple $100 million in to protect it. That makes no sense. This is finally getting attention. The Biodiversity Convention took a decision to reduce harmful subsidies by at least $500 billion per year, and so on. So it's getting attention finally. At the Desertification Convention where I was last month, experts were widely discussing the fact that to restore the degraded lands, it was going to cost $1 billion a day. But then they also pointed out that $2 billion a day of public funds were being spent on agricultural subsidies, most of which were harmful. So the conclusion we all drew last month was the funds needed for restoration are available, they're just being spent on the wrong damn things. So this is an enormously consequential understanding that's finally catching on, as I said, and it must lead to major reforms in the coming years for food system transformation and for the other issues of importance. Of course, in terms of finance, private companies have a huge role to play in terms of sustainability and nature-positive practices and removing deforestation and other things from the value chains. That's a whole other topic for a whole other talk. So how can government policy make a difference to transform the food system? Now that we have a sense that it is possible to generate the resources needed, let's look at some progressive agricultural policies that can make a real difference for climate, biodiversity, and land. And just a few months ago, the government of Denmark announced a major agreement between the government, the environmental community, and the agriculture. It's really interesting to get government, environmentalists, and the agriculture together.
Do you mean farmers or
Farmers and the coalitions of farmers. And this combines regulatory teeth with large-scale government funding to address emissions. It's the world's most comprehensive national effort to address the environmental challenges of agriculture. And even though agriculture contributes, as we said 10 times, 25 to 30% of emissions, so far most governments have totally ignored reducing agriculture emissions in their climate plans. It's unbelievable that a quarter of the whole problem is there, and governments have completely ignored this in their government plans. So what does this plan entail? Key elements of this agreement are they're taxing greenhouse gas emissions from livestock production, and this tax revenue is going to help all farmers reduce their emissions. They're paying farmers $100 a ton to reduce emissions from nitrogen fertilization, which is a major source of pollution in that country. And they're restoring something like 10% of the country to be turned into carbon sequestration and biodiversity protection. And this policy complements what Denmark has already done to increase production of plant-based proteins and reduce food loss. And I think we can say that many countries could learn a lot from Denmark about what they can do. Although all national circumstances are different, there's a lot to learn here. And under the Climate Convention, governments have committed to update their plans every 5 years. And this year is one of those 5 years. So we're hoping that many countries will take this opportunity to embed agricultural emissions into their plans. And next year, the climate meeting is in Brazil. That's a really important one. And that would be kind of a benchmark for countries to aim for. So, as we said, we need to make urgent progress on all three approaches to transition to a better food system. And I find this slide useful to provide a visualization. Today, we're focusing mostly on one of those areas, the plant-rich food system, or dietary shift, to said another way, because of the enormous potential for human health and planetary health, and because it receives less attention and less resources than it deserves. But as Dr. Gregory told us last November, we urgently need to amplify efforts to implement agroecological practices such as conservation agriculture, agroforestry, and regenerative agriculture. And we need to reduce the 30 to 40% of all food produced that's lost or wasted. And this slide shows how all three approaches interact and are synergistic, and how taken together they can provide a roadmap towards a food system we need to feed the 10 billion people that we're going to have by 2050 within planetary boundaries. And now let's look at just one more topic that's very relevant to this plant-rich food system. The role of alternative proteins in transforming the food system. So the case here, just in summary, the adoption of lower animal diets will be important to meeting the climate and biodiversity goals and health goals. And there's been a little bit of success in encouraging plant-based diets, but animal consumption has still rising and expected to rise a lot. And one emerging technology that has the potential to reduce animal source food consumption is the development of what's called novel plant-based alternatives, or alternative proteins, for meat and milk. And a global economic study, land use model, shows that a significant shift toward these alternative proteins could cause very, very substantial environmental benefits. So just a word about one little known benefit to alternative proteins. 70% of all antibiotics are used for animals. It's a huge public health crisis. It's generating, and it's important because it threatens our ability to treat infections caused by bacteria, virus, fungi, and parasites. Because if there's resistance developed to these antibiotics, then when we need them for our health care, we could be up the creek without a paddle. So reducing the overuse of antibiotics is a huge concern in the agricultural sector. And by having alternative meats, you don't have that problem. Also, 3 out of 4 emerging infectious diseases in humans originate in animals and are in part caused by our reliance on animal farming. And these types of pathogens, they're called zoonotic. They're called, the pathogens are called zoonotic, meaning they form in animals and they can be transmitted to humans. And the majority of the diseases that have caused pandemics and epidemics have been zoonotic. That's AIDS, avian flu, swine flu, SARS, MERS, Ebola, Zika, and COVID. So one important benefit of alternative proteins is it gets us away from that concern. Now, Hunju and I work with this organization. It's an interesting group, and they have kind of a radical perspective. Just wanted to share it with you briefly. So basically what they're saying is, look, Charles and Hunju, good try, but education advocacy is not working. And the meat consumption is just shooting through the roof. Come on in, there's seats here somewhere. So we're failing, right? So what do we do about that? They're making the analogy between alternative proteins and renewable energy and electric vehicles. And here's their theory of change in a moment. So they're saying energy use will go up, so we need renewable energy. They're saying personal transport miles will go up, so we need electric vehicles to replace gas-powered cars. And meat consumption will go up, so we need alternative proteins to replace meat. So that's their theory. And what they're saying is, don't try to convince meat eaters to eat less meat, for God's sakes. We just simply need to provide them with a great tasting product that costs the same. It needs to taste as good or better, and it needs to cost as the same or less. So that's their theory. And they've done a whole lot of resource. The number of research documents and studies that are coming out is dramatic. But this area of development is growing and seems real potential for this to contribute to environment and health benefits. They're working on research all over the world and stay tuned. I think some interesting things will come from there. So, last part about this alternative protein discussion is my former organization, as of last March, called UNA, published just last year, or actually the end of 2023, a publication called What's Cooking? An assessment of the potential impacts of these alternative proteins. And the report probes deeply into this issue. And the main findings are right here. I'll summarize them. And sorry for so much reading, but I couldn't get it down any further. So their findings are basically there's strong potential for environmental benefits, great reduced risks of antimicrobial resistance in pandemics. The health issue is one that we really have to pay attention, that these alternative proteins are often ultra-processed, with high salt. There's a lot of work going on to try to mitigate that. And the comparison between actual meat and processed meats is not clear. I've seen studies on both sides saying one is much better and the other saying the other is better. Long-term studies are underway, but they haven't happened yet. And that they're obviously drastically reduce harm to animals. And the other conclusion is that maybe if some of the millions or hundreds of millions of dollars of subsidies to animal industry were to be diverted to plant investments, maybe we would see some growth in that potential. And they also concluded that we need a whole lot more independent assessments of the environmental, health, and socioeconomic implications. So there's there's some potential. And to wrap that up, as we all know from Dr. Hassan's work on the Canadian dietary guidelines and other sources, the best dietary option is mostly whole foods, mostly plant, not alternative anything. But if we're going to reduce our meat consumption, let's also invest in alternative proteins that have reduced environmental impact and that do away with animal suffering. That's a good thing. And let's strive to have these alternatives be as healthy as possible. And the World Bank concluded a year and a half ago that the kind of investments that are needed to reach the potential here is exactly what led to the massive cost reductions in key climate technology like solar PV, which would reduce costs by 85% in just 10 years. Lithium-ion batteries for electric cars reduced 89% in just 14 years or so. So what the bank is saying is investments in this technology has the potential to be as transformative as those investments. But let's eat like this whenever possible. Okay, now, last couple of parts. How are we doing here? Yeah, we're still on time, okay. So look at this. Agribusiness rivals oil and gas. This really surprised me. I've been digging into this the last couple of weeks. I never knew my life would change when Elaine asked me to do this talk. My whole life changed because now suddenly I've been looking around and studying things. Agribusiness rivals oil and gas industry in pollution, political lobbying, and resisting the change that's needed. I'm getting political here. We're shifting gears a little bit. So I showed this slide just to be aware that the meat and dairy industries, or we could call them agribusiness or big meat and dairy, sort of like the term big pharma, are becoming as large and powerful as the oil and gas industries. And their influence is not necessarily always benevolent. The top meat and dairy corporations emit more greenhouse gases than Exxon, Shell, or BP. I'll bet nobody knew that. I sure didn't know that. And the top 20 meat and dairy corporations emit more greenhouse gases than the entire German economy. And we've seen how influential the fossil fuel industry has been in national and international energy policy, and how effective they've been in delaying, distracting, and derailing support for climate action, renewable energy, and blocking the absolutely necessary transition phase out of fossil fuels. So if not for their influence, we surely would have had seen strong climate action by now. Because as long as 30 years ago, when I started at the UN, we already knew everything we needed to know about the future that has now come. We saw that coming 30 damn years ago. And any action on that was blocked by the fossil fuel special interest. And as you know, oil companies followed the model of how tobacco companies delayed cigarette regulations that could have saved millions of people's lives from lung cancer. So I'm seeing some evidence, here I get political, that big meat and dairy industries are starting to try to obstruct action on food system transformation and climate action. I've seen it in the various meetings I've been to recently. And we need to be vigilant about the narratives that these companies are propagating about dietary shift, about alternative proteins, about the various options ahead. And we need to carefully watch the science that's being funded by these groups and make sure that it's upright and it isn't just downplaying the food sector impact on climate, and they don't promote their preferred options unless the science really supports that. And almost daily, I think we're all seeing reports about how companies like Tyson, this big meat company in the US, is massively polluting the local air, water, and soil of local communities, how they're bullying and systematically mistreating workers and farmers and so on. So all of this is more troubling in this age of misinformation and disinformation, where just yesterday, Mark Zuckerberg, the owner of Meta or Facebook, whatever it's called, announced after meeting with Donald Trump just Friday, 2 days ago, that he's essentially ending fact-checking. So in this world where special interests are taking over and there's no fact-checking, that's a dark, dark world, of the Mad Max world that I don't like. And this topic of disinformation and misinformation is a great concern to me, given the history of the industries: tobacco, oil and gas, the gun makers, the National Rifle Association, plastics, big agriculture, and then most recently the US election. Just nothing but misinformation, disinformation. So I'm interested in your thoughts. How do we deal about this? But it's in the mix on food system transformation, and I just wanted to kind of highlight that and alert us. The Union of Concerned Scientists recently reported that agribusiness lobbyists outspent oil and gas and defense. Look at agribusiness is the bar on the left in light blue, and then defense, and then oil and gas. They're outspending those folks. So that tells you something. I don't know what it tells you, but it tells you something. And we need to be aware of this influence on policy, on public information. We need to take it into account in our strategies for action. And one outcome of this enormous outpouring of lobbying by agribusiness could be that in the US now, 800 times more public funding and nearly 200 times more lobbying money goes into animal source food products than alternatives. 800 times public money. And that's the result, I think, of some of this. So we can't allow agribusiness to impede the progress of food system transformation the way oil and gas companies have done it on climate change. Okay, so now conclusions. The scientific evidence is unequivocal. Nature is being destroyed by us at a rate unprecedented in human history, and our food system is a primary driver of this damage, period. 2, moving from a food system that exploits the planet to one that restores it for nature and people will take widespread, multi-sector, multi-action, multi-level action, starting with us. And while all approaches are needed simultaneously, including improved food production and reducing food loss and waste, advancing a plant-rich food system offers significant potential for emissions reductions and many, many, many other benefits, while offering good value for money vis-a-vis other sectors of the economy. And this is one important way that can help us urgently bend the curve on the negative impacts of the global food system, so we can feed the 10 billion people expected by 2050 within planetary boundaries. And my last point is, I want to close with a reflection for all of you. The recent US elections sent a shockwave through the global community. Welcome, Mark. We're just concluding here. I'll give you a summary personally. The recent U.S. election sent a shockwave through the global community working to stop climate change, and surely a shockwave through every other community in the world. The U.S. has the largest economy in the world and has generated more carbon pollution historically than any other country on Earth by far. And so it has an outsized impact on the climate, and now it's turning away from the climate issue, even turning against it, and the rest of the world. And this is an enormous setback for all of us. And I'm sensing a global rightward, right-tending shift caused by the pandemic, inflation, mass immigration, and climate denialism and inaction seems to be coming along with that shift. And what's really ironic and perverse in my view is that climate change is actually driving mass migration that's causing this rightward trend that's undermining action on climate. Isn't that perverse and bizarre? For example, there's lots of evidence that the war in Syria that started in 2011 was triggered by historic climate-induced droughts that devastated the crops and livestock, sparked protests among the farmers, the government suppressed them, it started a civil war, and then millions and millions of people from Syria migrated through Europe. And I watched the trains in Germany, 500 a day coming through, and that mass migration then causes, I guess I'm not European, let's have the Europeans say what really happened, but my sense was that there has been a political impact on that. And the 3-degree warmer world that we're currently headed toward is likely to cause a 50% drop in food production, according to the World Resources Institute, which would surely fuel more suffering and more mass migration. So the New York Times recently, David Wallace wrote something very powerful, I thought, talking about how those who are studying the political economy of climate change have predicted that the kind of ecological hardship we are experiencing will lead to a zero-sum view of the world, a kind of a lifeboat ethics vision of politics, a kind of dog-eat-dog approach to national identity that has people shrink our circles of empathy smaller and smaller, increasingly in tribalistic terms. And that's the trend that I'm sort of seeing in the US. And this trend is obviously not the mentality or spirit that will allow us to come together as we need to solve these crises. So we have to fight back against this tribalism. And I welcome your thoughts on how the heck we can do that. And then just the last thing to say here is, recommendations. You can look at them on your leisure. The obvious, raising the ambition level of these climate plans. I like Dr. Hassan to talk about the possibility of increasing the ambition of national dietary guidelines, because when these guidelines improve people's health, it automatically improves the impact on the planet as well. That's the best thing about all of this. What I do for my own health is what's best for the planetary health. So, and then a lot of other ideas here I have. And then for ourselves, we can educate ourselves further. We can increase consumption of plants in our own diets. We can start a meat-free Monday program. We can encourage local Bowen restaurants to offer more plant-based options. Please help with that. We can advocate food system change with our governments. We can start with ourselves. And then some resources. These are some great sources of information. And then I'll stop here. Humanity. This is Johan Rockstrom, a friend of mine who leads the Potsdam Institute, leading bright light in this space. Humanity now poses a threat to the stability of the planet. This requires nothing less than a new global agricultural revolution. So that's it. So that's all. And it was only 55 minutes.
You have time for 65 plus?
Okay, you want to see those 65 slides? Okay, so thank you so much for your attention. Elaine had an idea that we might have a few comments here, and then people just turn to their neighbor and say, "What's of concern to you?" and then have another few minutes of comments. You want to do that?
Sure. The idea was
Sir, Professor Phil Gregory.
I couldn't get away with being silent. So, I really appreciate all the work you obviously went to and your whole career to sort of come pouring out into this focused discussion, which is amazing. And clearly the lens that you are looking through is very different from the lens that I would look through. You talked about agribusiness and various choices between meat production and crop production. And I use the lens of basically industrial agriculture versus nature-based methods of regenerative agriculture. And so it's quite fascinating because it's such a complex subject. You could really use many different viewpoints, and so yours definitely has added to my thinking. A lot of your talk was somewhat focused on global warming in effect, and greenhouse gases, and how this food produces this greenhouse gas, and that's not a good thing. So I'd just like to remind the audience of one of the things that I was talking about, and I think that the narrative on global warming is and climate change is expanding and it's now broader. And one of the things that's included, of course, is the realization that desertification, as you mentioned in the commission, is a big player.
Yes.
And so, interestingly, desertification, of course, is a situation where it results from land degradation, in which we no longer can grow plants. There's very little transpiration of water vapor as a result. We have very arid environments, and there's not even a possibility of a thunderstorm in these really arid environments because it's just so dry. Any cloud that forms is evaporated almost immediately. And so it gets hotter and hotter, and we now know that roughly 2/3 of the land mass is desertifying. So it's a big deal. And so, oddly enough, the best solution that we've come up with to reversing desertification is using herds of herbivores grazing the way nature intended them to graze. And so if we get rid of all the herbivores and desertification ends up being a bigger player than the greenhouse gases, then we're up the creek. So I think we have to recognize that nature's complexity is phenomenal, and we have to move very carefully, and we have to look at this situation through all these lenses that you were talking about.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Really great point. And as I mentioned, I've been working on these conventions since 1992, but I never attended a conference of the parties of the Desertification Convention until December. It's embarrassing. I just didn't pay attention. Like you say, and I was so shocked. I did a whole report on what I learned about the seriousness, like you say, of the degradation. And like I said, 3/4 of the earth is already suffering from drylands, and it's getting worse and worse, like you say. And the solutions, there are a number of them, but it's not straightforward. But I really appreciated your point and understand. And it's true. You can look at it's like the story of blind people looking at elephants. Somebody grabs the foot, somebody grabs the prognosis, and so on. You have different perspectives on it, and I appreciate yours very much. Okay, who else? Yes, there's a friend.
Thanks, Charles. I mean, this is the second time I've had the pleasure of meeting, and both times it's been fabulously rich. You said partway through, you were apologizing for being political there, but I rather think this is fundamentally political. At the end of the day, the data tells us things, but it's about power, and I think power is about the stories we tell. And so from my background as head of Island Pacific School, I think it becomes an education problem, because that's where we create the stories in young people. And I'd love to do more with that at the school. I think schools are really important in communities. They're a hub. Everybody's connected to a school somehow through their kids or grandkids or work there. But it's where we teach discernment, and it's where we teach kids to be aware of things like tribalism. It's where we can teach them how to eat well and what that means. They do that in Japan, as you know. Eating is not just fueling your body, it's a cultural thing. So I'll follow up. I'd love to get a bunch of this information. I'd love to invite you and Hyunju to come up to the school and deliver the same conversation to the students and to the families if you're open to it. I'd be very grateful.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to find another use for this. Whenever Elaine invites me, I go, uh-oh, this is really, I think I spoke here, was it 3 years ago or 4 years ago? The last time I spoke for the...
Oh, I think it was just 2 years.
Oh, okay.
Long time.
So it's good to maybe have another use for that, because as you can tell, I spend a lot of time figuring some things out. I'd like to, use it other places.
And it will be posted on the library site as well. And I think one of the things about once it's posted is I think you can actually control the speed. So you'll be able to listen to this at a little slow pace.
Oh, yeah, so this is recorded.
Or speed it up.
Yes, Dr.
What you've talked about, it seems to me, is predicated on the fact that we have 8 billion people going to 10.
Yes.
So it assumes that we have to produce an enormous amount of food for our population. But you didn't say anything about reducing the population, and I see this in a lot of discussions like this. It just says, oh, the population is going to increase.
Yeah.
Is that really what we want to do? And how would we not?
Yeah, that's a good question. And even though, let's remember, even if we stated 8 billion, and everybody ate like us, we need 4.5 planets, right? So we're already digging a hole for ourselves. So whether we grow or not, we need this change. The change is making it even more urgent and even more challenging. And yes, I think population is, if there were a lever you could switch, then yes, we'd want to switch that. But it seems to be something that's not easily controllable. That extra 2 billion are headed our way. Also kind of, not illogically, but counterintuitively, it seems that the data shows that the best linked phenomenon to reduced population growth rate is education of women, empowerment of women. Yeah. And as societies improve their quality of life, their growth rates have tended to go down. So almost counterintuitively, the more we feed each other, take care of each other, that's maybe the strategy to get population under control. But you're right, I didn't talk about, that was a topic that ended up in the 65 slides that didn't come this way. It's an important topic, but I think what's also important, as I said, that we're already in a hole, and whether we grow or not, we have to solve this one. Thank you. Yes, Dr. Iceman and then Monique.
Thanks, Delson. Okay, them first. Venus first.
Oh, no, go first.
We have 2 Europeans here.
What I want to say is that I grew up in France and eating all kind of food. And the moment I moved to Canada, and I just decided one day, I was in the restaurant business selling food like a normal food with meat and everything. And I decided one day, meeting someone who was a true vegetarian, to become vegetarian. And it was just the day before I opened a new restaurant. My restaurant sold everything, but I decided to become vegetarian. And that was 50 years ago. And the last 25 years I was vegetarian. The past 25 I became vegan, because I thought that was very important, was part of my path. And what I want to say is that when you walk your talk and you do what what is important for the earth. You help other people to make a change in their own life, and this is what I feel that my life is about. And I don't think my life was expected to be that long. I'm 82, and my grandparents died at the age of 50s, and my parents in their 70s, and now I'm already 82, and I think it will prolong your life and a better quality of life, as well as helping the planet, you know. And I'm so impressed by your research, Charles. I mean, you provide us with so important information that will help others to walk that path.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so
that
much.
conversation. Thank you. You're an inspiration. I want to be like you when I grow up. Thank you. Dr. Eisman.
I'm afraid you never grow up, Charles. I would like to add something. You bring some amazing puzzle pieces to it. But when we look to the big Green Deal in Europe, the backbone there was agriculture change.
And everybody here, even
So
talk really loud.
I want to add some things.
Can you turn around? Turn around.
Amen.
Stand
Amen.
up.
Those people.
Sorry. When we look to
Stand up and turn around.
this tweet is there's three things I would like to add. When you look to 15 years ago, when Europe wanted to leading the climate pact and the climate change, they went through food. So the whole backbone for the European Green Deal has been built around the agriculture shift, not subsidizing classical thing. And what's the big change there? And that's what I want to complement with the story, is to go away from mass production and big international companies. And that's what I also see. If you then also make a comparison to green energy and the way we deal with that, the whole movement globally now, and that's also with the COPs. So the COPs since 4 years ago started going to cities much more than to countries. And so there's a whole movement going on that put the importance of communities and the importance of regions again. And we're in such a volatile situation in global billions and trillions that more and more, I think, investments, but also empowerment comes in the hands of bringing food systems locally, producing food locally, and that's regeneration. And that's also that's the answer also to the climate change. And that's the part that I didn't see in the presentation. That's going to be slide 60 to 67. I want to bring it forward because, like, for the Food Resilience Group, for the Conservancy, for so many initiatives on islands, it looks small, but these are for me all little pillars of hope. If we combine them, if we integrate them slowly, but precisely, we can take it in our hands. And it's very dangerous now to look into all of these international movements. That's the answer will come from the one that's going to be Trump. Don't forget it. We're going to be in a devastating period for a few years of time, which is the perfect storm to step up and take in our hands what we can invest in. And that's what I wanted to add to your amazing way of bringing things together. But I also want to bring it as an empowerment. Like, it's not going to come from big business. It's going to come from investments in smaller businesses, but significant investments, and eat differently. I'm with you on that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Very, very nice. Okay, do you want to, is this freebie or? Yes.
Just one
Oh, sorry, yes.
I just wanted,
Please.
I don't want to say a lot of things, I guess, but of course the data that you have put up is sort of based on world averages, which is really driven by the United States. So if we just think in terms of subsidies themselves, that's the situation in Canada is very, very different than the situation in subsidies in the States. We do have an overarching food policy in Canada that came in 2019, which has involved actually the different silos working together so that we put together policies that involve health, environment, industry, climate change, agriculture. We have 16 different departments that worked on that. We traveled across the country to get reflection by indigenous groups up north or whatever. And so there was a large announcement about how you actually bring these things together. Something that came out of it, which was kind of linked into the food guide, was that the big companies were very much against where we were going with the food guide. They tried to pressure the Senate Committee on Agriculture to say, oh, you can't make a food guide without linking it to industry. And our response that I wrote was, yes, I agree with you, you can't de-link industry and food.
That's
So you
why.
have to actually, if you're gonna give subsidies to foods that are healthy for Canadians. And the Minister of Agriculture agreed to that and committed to that to the cabinet as well. So, you know, in Canada, it's a little bit different, as you've seen that in the international stage as well, that we're quite a bit along in there. And you think of subsidies that we put out since 2019 in Canada. Agriculture Canada's put out, you know, close to $500 million into producing plant-based proteins, increasing production of plant-based proteins. They just added another $150 million about a year ago there. We have programs to bring young farmers and have small farms like you were talking about. That has actually come through all the consultation that was done 5 to 7 years ago. We've got, you know, there are lots of different funding programs. There's funding programs to support farmers who are not wanting to use the pesticides that you're talking about, but how do you actually control pests in an organic environment as well? But there are actually subsidies from our Canadian government to do that as well. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but the discussions have taken place in Canada because we have had, here comes the political statement, because we've actually had a government in place since 2015 that has introduced, that is interested in the health of Canadians and the health of where we're going as a society. And you know, my theory is that we're only 4 months behind the Americans with respect to where we're going. And certainly my interactions with the Conservatives has been very much like based on no facts, based on industry influence. And that has been, you know, the 20 years I had before 2015, that where you were pulled in and it was all about industry influence in terms of what you could do for Canadians' health. And that's what people aren't realizing.
Yeah.
And probably people in here that would go want to get the Conservatives in again. Well, that's what you're gonna get. You're gonna get the states, maybe a little bit less Trump, but not that far.
Wow, beautifully said, thank you. Amazing. Incredible little island, isn't it? We have people like Dr. Gregory and Dr. Hutchison and Dr. Whitehead and Dr. Plowman and so many of you all here, experts, and Dr. Eisman. So many of you. Very welcome. Yes.
So let me add another discipline to this. So I'm a psychologist. And I've been also, like Monique, thinking about, you know, changes in generational experiences and our values, you know, so my parents, who grew up in the Depression, who came from England when there was rationing, you know, we had meat once a week, and it was a small little roast for 7 people. And then I had a boyfriend in high school who'd come from Chicago, and the first time I went to Sunday dinner in this American household down the road, and they had a piece of beef that would have probably fed 100 people according to the proportions that we were used to. So we were not malnourished, but we had an expectation of what to eat, and we cooked. We never went to restaurants. That was a very rare event. So the consumerism around what do individuals do, the comment about the school children. You know, I taught university students, and for the last 20 years, we started saying it's the generation that knows how to eat but doesn't know how to cook. So culturally, we've lost skills. And we've kind of, like, why do we eat the things we eat, and why do we eat the quantities we eat? And have we just been sucked into advertising and this social media making it worse? So I think we can kind of take back our cultural, psychological, you know, autonomy over this, and maybe it used to be better. But I don't know, do you have actually, like, what are the statistics about what's on an American plate versus a Canadian plate? And has that changed over time? I think
Maybe Dr. Hassan knows better, but it's much worse, right?
Certainly the quantities.
Yeah, like I showed you, 219 pounds a year of beef for Canadians and 150 for Canadians, something like that.
But I think it's, you know, if we
introduction to fast food from the States in it. And in Mexico, people were not overweight. But if you look at now, at the state where Mexico is, it's one of the countries that have the most overweight people in. And it's just that influence of all the fast food that came from the States, right? All the hamburgers and the pizzas that Mexico didn't have.
Subsidized food also, so it's cheaper to buy a Big Mac than to buy a broccoli. Artificially inflated, deflated price, making it more attractive and addictive. Yeah, so Big Mac would probably cost 3 times as much as it currently costs if it were without the subsidies. Thank you, good point. Dr. Gregory.
Just in regard to the last comment, it's clear to me that to change, it has to be a cultural change. It can't just be an individual change. And I'm reminded of Dr. Mark Hyman, who many of you may have heard of as integrated health specialist. He was working with a minister one time who was extremely overweight, had a very bad diet. And so he worked with this minister, and the minister made remarkable improvements. And he said, I have to take this home to my congregation. He had a very large congregation, hundreds of people. And so he invited Hyman to come and work with the congregation. And they transformed that community to a different view of eating and radically changed the health of the population.
Well, eating has got to be, such a hallmark of culture that the opportunity seems huge.
But it has to be culture. And maybe by having these talks, we're going to, affect your culture even more.
Very profound. Wow, Elaine's statement has really sparked a conflagration here, all kinds of important insights. It's really great. In terms of mobilizing religious leaders, I've spent the last 6 years of my life mobilizing religious leaders to protect the tropical forests in Amazon, Congo Basin, and Indonesia. It's been very effective because, like you say, they have access to billions of people and they're listened and influential, and once they understand the importance of these issues, they can do a lot about it. Okay, yes, Carmen, last 1 or 2. Let's do a couple of quick rounds. We want to finish in time, which is just 4 minutes to 3 minutes.
I'm really impressed with the knowledge that is involved here. As you said, there is 5 or 6 experts in this little island.
More than that, I think there's 20.
Knowledge and experience and everything. Anyway, that's one little thing. But what I wanted to ask is, how do we start helping or putting pressure? Because you were saying you don't want to be political, but as Brad mentioned, we do have to be political to some extent because we need to lobby. And I think the major pressure point that we have to start putting at is how do we start lobbying in our little island and then growing and expanding and helping, especially when we have such an array and such a source of knowledge here. I mean, it's really amazing. I'll be happy to help in any way, but you guys are the experts. You guys are the ones that will have to lead us as to how we can.
Thank you.
Here.
Any quick responses to Carmen about how do we build a movement?
We are in Green Party for the coast. I mean, I think that was a start. It shows the awareness of this area.
I think the only solution. I think the only solution for me is usually 86.
He's in the gym. He can lift more weights than anybody else in the gym. He's a monster.
Not a lot I can do because I've run out of time. So I decided I'm going to come live with you. I'm going to let my girl go. I'm yours. You tell me what to do.
I will. Thank you, Jerry. Yes, Jackie, and then Monique.
One quick response to this is, one thing you can do is come and volunteer at Grafting Gardens and learn how to grow regeneratively.
Yes.
Yay!
Grafting
Gardens.
And Monique.
Okay, so as a suggestion, for people who don't know about it, there is a group on Bowen Island called Bowen Vegan, and once a month we invite people, the community, even if you are not, you are still a meat eater, you can come and bring something vegetarian or preferably vegan. And we all share a big meal in someone's house. And it's really very, very good, and that gives you a taste of, really, you can have a feast with just meat, non-meat based food, it's just fabulous. And it's a very good place to come. And if you need any question about that, you can go and Bowen Vegan on Facebook, and you will have the date where we have the next meeting and the place and everything, and Mauritia from the library.
And next month is at our house. Next month, vegan potluck is at our house, so
Yes.
you're all invited. Right, Marisha?
You have a big house.
Dr. Carter?
Just a bit of a plug for the Rotary tomorrow. I think part of how you build culture is you tell a different story. And tomorrow at the Rotary, I'm leading a workshop on storytelling for community impact. So it's open to anyone. What time is it, Hillary?
7:30.
7:30. I should know that since I'm talking.
7:30. Dr. Brad Carter's, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
At Artisan Eats at 7:30, a little workshop on how to tell a good story.
Thank you so much. Marisha, and one just final word is you, but wanted to just thank Marisha and you, Elaine, and others who made this all possible, the Bowen Island Food Resilience Society and the Bowen Library. So grateful for the opportunity. And Dr. Hunju Lee will be next month's speaker if she survives the Amazon.
I don't have sort of final words to wrap this up. I actually had an opinion I wanted to throw out, and that was that I think we need to expand our understanding of what constitutes an expert. There are a lot of experts on Bowen Island, experts in cooking and how to cook a plant-based diet. One of my neighbors who's here, and I won't embarrass her by pointing her out, but she's been cooking vegan for years and is the best cook I know.
Where is she?
I'm not gonna do that. She wouldn't forgive me.
Self-identified.
And oh, good. And also a lot of expertise in gardening on this island, which is a really key thing, I think, in line with the comments you made about the importance of community. And just to throw out another couple of facts, there's only about 5% of land in Canada that is considered arable, and of that, 1% is highly arable and can grow pretty much anything. And in terms of politics and the kind of awareness that we need and the pressure we need to bring in a timely fashion, part of that at 1% in British Columbia is being flooded and for the Site C Dam. And that's the kind of silos that you talked about and the lack of awareness around the importance of food and agriculture. So we can make all those changes, in our own lives and in our communities, but we also have to take it to other levels as well. So that's probably not wrapping up comments, but thank you very much, Charles.
Thanks to all of you. What a great group. Everybody wanted to talk too. So thank you for coming out. What fun being with you. Thank you.
Well, whoever comes and waits.
I'm going to slip behind you.
Good.